Before the capes and cowls took over, the comic book trenches were filled with something far stranger than super soldiers. We're diving into the forgotten history of the Weird War era, a time when elite commandos didn't just dodge bullets, but traded fire with prehistoric dinosaurs, Nazi occultists, and literal ghosts of the Civil War. From haunted tanks to doomed penal battalions, these 10 legendary Marvel and DC military units once dominated the stands, only to vanish as the industry pivoted to superheroes. Here is the lost vanguard of combat. At number 10 is the Haunted Tank Crew of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting inside DC Comics' G.I. Combat issue 87 in 1961, the Haunted Tank Crew was led by Sergeant Jeb Stewart. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were an armored division light tank crew fighting through the North African Desert Campaign and the European theater. They fought intense tank duels against Rommel's Afrika Korps and elite Nazi panzer divisions. But the story takes a bizarre turn. The crew was never alone. Their tank was protected and guided by the literal ghost of Confederate cavalry commander J.E.B. Stuart, providing paranormal tactical advice that only Sergeant Stewart could see. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It brilliantly blended rigorously researched historical tank warfare with a ghost story. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. Anthology titles steadily lost their massive readership to the new superhero trends. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. At number 9 is the original Suicide Squad of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' The Brave and the Bold issue 25 in 1959, the squad was commanded by Rick Flag. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were an extremely expendable secret commando unit, handling covert intelligence and Pacific Island hopping, clashing with Japanese forces during the war that time forgot. But the story takes a bizarre turn. They were deployed to uncharted locations like Dinosaur Island, forced to fight prehistoric creatures, giant pterodactyls, and mutant monstrosities alongside human enemies. However, this 1959 Dinosaur Island unit has absolutely zero connection to the modern, villain-led Task Force X from the movies. The unit became known for this distinctive element. They were the industry's first expendable strike team, long before villains took the name. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. DC repurposed the moniker for supervillains. Today, they rarely appear. At number 8 is Captain Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders of Marvel. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in Marvel Comics' Captain Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders issue 1 in 1968, the Leatherneck Raiders were led by Captain Simon Savage. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were a USMC amphibious assault and commando unit, handling covert island sabotage across the Pacific theater and battling the Imperial Japanese Army. But the story takes a bizarre turn. Despite being set during World War II, they frequently encountered anachronistic, James Bond-esque sci-fi threats, including Japanese super submarines, clone-like samurai squads, and doomsday weapons built by Hydra's predecessors. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It was Marvel's attempt to bring Howling Commando-style action to the Marines. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. Their solo series was canceled after 19 issues in 1970 as Marvel aggressively pivoted towards superheroes. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. They remain completely overshadowed by the original Howling Commandos. Leaving standard combat behind, our next 4 bizarre units feature literal monsters, undead zombies, experimental robots, and prehistoric dinosaur islands. At number 7 is the Creature Commandos of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' Weird War Tales issue 93 in 1980, the Creature Commandos were led by Lieutenant Matthew Shreve. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were an experimental psychological warfare squad deployed across the European theater to fight Axis forces, sabotage bases, and instill terror in elite Nazi platoons. But the story takes a bizarre turn. The squad was composed of classic horror monsters drafted into military service, featuring a ferocious werewolf, a vampire, a patchwork Frankenstein monster, and a gorgon fighting alongside their ruthless human commander. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It perfectly blended universal monster horror tropes with gritty WW combat. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. When Weird War Tales was canceled in 1983, the Supernatural Squad lost its publishing home. Today, the unit makes a comeback starring in modern television. At number 6 is G.I. Zombie of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' Star-Spangled War Stories issue 138 in 1968, the operative was known only as Jared. The unit operated as this type of military force. He was a solo, covert operative, handling highly dangerous infiltration missions, sabotaging enemy strongholds, and fighting Axis forces. But the story takes a bizarre turn. Jared was quite literally a reanimated corpse. He was an undead American soldier fighting through World War II, shrugging off fatal bullet wounds and using his terrifying, rotting appearance to strike fear into the enemy. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It brought a pure, EC comic-style zombie horror element directly into mainstream military continuity. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. The concept proved a bit too gruesome and bizarre for standard anthology titles of the era. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics, though the concept was briefly revived. At number 5 is Project M's Marine Detachment of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' Star-Spangled War Stories issue 125 in 1966, the Project M platoon was led by Corporal McAfee. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were Marine infantry support for experimental technology, handling top-secret deployments across the Pacific, fighting jungle skirmishes, defending beachheads, and battling Japanese infantry and saboteurs. But the story takes a bizarre turn. The Marines constantly found themselves facing supernatural samurai, mechanical menaces, and prehistoric island beasts alongside their silent, robotic squadmate. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It seamlessly blended 1950s atomic sci-fi and Frankenstein tropes with standard, gritty Marine combat. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. When Star-Spangled War Stories ended, the experimental blend of war and sci-fi lost its home at DC. Today, the unit frequently appears in modern comics. At number 4 is the Dinosaur Island War That Time Forgot, Marines of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' Star-Spangled War Stories issue 90 in 1960, the Dinosaur Island Marines were led by rotating soldiers. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were an amphibious Pacific Theater task force handling covert island reconnaissance, surviving dangerous jungle skirmishes, and battling Imperial Japanese forces. But the story takes a bizarre turn. During routine naval maneuvers, they were mysteriously stranded on an uncharted, primordial Pacific landmass swarming with massive prehistoric predators. These stranded soldiers were continuously forced to fight terrifying dinosaurs, giant pterodactyls, and sea monsters using only standard military weapons. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It spectacularly blended tense military survival tropes with classic giant monster horror action. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. When the massive anthology era finally concluded, science fiction military mashups lost their publishing avenue. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. We have seen haunted tanks and literal monsters, but our top 3 military units are completely defined by paranormal misfortune. At number 3 is the original Losers of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' GI Combat issue 138 in 1969, the Losers were led by Captain Storm. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were a Joint Forces Special Missions team executing high-risk sabotage operations across World War II. They handled secret extraction and demolition, fighting Axis forces. But the story takes a bizarre turn. They were cursed with perpetual misfortune. While the core team survived, every Allied soldier attached to their unit was killed. This curse often drew them into weird war tales, forcing them to fight on haunted battlefields and survive paranormal events. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It had a pervasive theme of constant failure and guilt, incredibly rare for comic heroes back then. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. The original team was explicitly killed off in 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. And for the record, they have absolutely no connection to the team from the 2010 movie The Losers. At number 2 is Mademoiselle Marie's French Resistance Cell of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics. Debuting in DC Comics' Star-Spangled War Stories issue 84 in 1959, the French underground cell was commanded by Mademoiselle Marie. However, Mademoiselle Marie actually became a legacy codename used by multiple women across different eras, not just one person. Anyway, the unit operated as this type of military force. They executed sabotage, intelligence, and partisan warfare, disrupting Axis supply lines across occupied France through covert assassinations and train derailments. But the story takes a bizarre turn. Their covert missions routinely crashed headfirst into occult elements. Marie's guerrilla fighters frequently found themselves face-to-face with Nazi supernatural rituals, cursed artifacts, and paranormal experiments hidden in French chateaus. The unit became known for this distinctive element. It was a highly competent, female-led combat and espionage unit, taking center stage in the heavily male-dominated Silver Age. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. When war anthologies were systematically canceled in the late 1970s and 1980s, grounded espionage characters had nowhere left to be published. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. And at number 1, Captain Storm's PT boat crew of DC. This military unit first appeared during the peak of war comics, debuting in DC Comics' Captain Storm issue 1. In 1964, the PT boat squadron was led by Captain William Storm. The unit operated as this type of military force. They were a naval patrol torpedo boat crew handling Pacific patrols and escorts. They fought skirmishes against larger warships, Japanese destroyers, and submarines. But the story takes a bizarre turn. While executing standard naval warfare, the crew repeatedly encountered oceanic horror. They faced off against cursed ghost ships, terrifying prehistoric creatures, and supernatural whirlpools threatening to swallow their wooden boat whole. The unit became known for this distinctive element. Naval warfare was rarely covered in mainstream comics, and mixing it with prehistoric horror gave them a distinct flavor. As war comics faded, the unit slowly disappeared. The solo series folded quickly, and editorial moved Storm into the losers, completely abandoning his crew. Today, the unit rarely appears in modern comics. From haunted tanks to dinosaur islands, these units prove war was weirder before superheroes took over. Which squad deserves a comeback? Comment down and press the subscribe button and bell icon for regular updates.